Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to all. Today is Monday, Yom Sheni b'Shabbat, Yom Heth b'Chislev Toshin Pei Wow, according to our Jewish calendar, corresponding to the 8th of December 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. And unfortunately, there are many Jews who still require that Gregorian crutch, which we should all be rid of by now, I would hope. But nevertheless, we know that there are those who require this crutch. Plus, there are others who are not unfamiliar with our calendar altogether, perhaps non-Jews, and that's fine. So I mentioned both dates for the record. So the topic that you, Meir, wanted to raise, please define the topic.
To discuss the question really is what about real Lashon HaRa? What is considered real Lashon HaRa? And public figures, specifically political rabbanim, these are public figures, and I find nobody's ever allowed to talk about them or name names, and therefore nothing really gets discussed. As the Rav mentioned last week, the discussion everything gets shut down and stopped, and that is that really is that the proper halacha that one cannot speak about public figures and with names and knowing people's shitas, knowing people's beliefs and views?
Well, first of all, are you speaking of politicians or other
I think all of
public
the above.
officials, or are you speaking more specifically about rabbanim, rabbis,
All
Torah
all of the
personalities,
above.
all of the
All of the
above?
above. Yes, yes. And obviously, I'm sure people are more concerned if it's a rav, if it's a Talmid Chacham. Nobody wants to say anything against a big Talmid Chacham, a well-known big Talmid. So everyone is silent about everything, it seems. So I mean, that also, I have to say, that never made sense to me when a suspected sex offender, chas v'shalom, moves in next door to someone or in a neighborhood. It suddenly becomes Lashon Hara. Nobody's allowed to say anything and nobody has any idea. And to me, it just sounds like you're setting these families up to chas v'shalom to just fall. And the kids, I mean, I don't have to speak about the specific
All right.
details,
Well,
but I think
let's begin with that
it's
example.
all connected. They see my view, it's all connected.
Let us begin with that example that you mentioned just now. Let us say there are persistent rumors about a particular person that he is known to or suspected of molesting and molesting children or other people, non even adults, in a totally inappropriate way. First of all, let us define what is a persistent rumor. In the Talmud Masechet Kiddushin, we have something similar, and this is halacha lema'aseh, makin alot tova hashemua. That's the name of the halacha, which means that if there is a persistent rumor, what's called in the Talmud a kala de la pasik, in other words, a voice, a sound, a rumor that is constantly heard from different directions, from different quarters, regarding a particular person. There, the context is as follows: a man is. It's widely rumored that a particular man behaves improperly with women. So you might think that, well, you need to have witnesses and you need to have go through some kind of legal procedure in order to establish his guilt or something like that. So the fact is that is not true. If it is a persistent rumor, which we hear again, time and again from various quarters, and they're all pointing in the same direction. It's not one story says that he stole, and the other person says something he behaves inappropriately with women. They're all pointing to this one type of behavior. The halacha is makim al lo tovah hashmu'ah. In other words, the Beth Din will give a lashing, a whipping to such a person based on that persistent rumor, on that kala de la pasik. That's the halacha. Nothing, nothing that I can be accused of making up.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Shulchan Aruch as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
generally well established halacha. No mahloket on the subject.
The question I would imagine is how do we define persistent? What is considered persistent rumor? Is that
The halacha does not specify exactly
oh,
or quantify what is a persistent rumor, but the fact is that if it becomes something that many people in the neighborhood, in this community, in this society, know about, speak about, it's rumored again and again, that's considered a kala de la pasik. That's considered a persistent rumor or a report. Maybe it's not a rumor, it's a report, a persistent report. Okay? If it's if look, there has to be usually there's a very sound reason why various people in a community, in a neighborhood, start whispering about a particular person having done this, that, or the other.
mhm,
It doesn't, these things tend not to emanate from people's imaginations purely. There almost always is some basis. Now, you can say, well, maybe someone's out to get this person and blacken his name. Could be, and that's why it's a kala de la pasik that we're talking about. In other words, a report that we keep hearing from different people from different quarters. It's not one person. You can't attribute this to a vendetta that someone has against another person or something like that. On the other hand, if you're aware that this person has it in for the other person and therefore may in fact be making up stories about him, then yes, then that's a good reason to ignore that
but
report.
it's impo I mean, Rav, please forgive me. It's impossible to know if a person has a gripe on another person. I mean, we don't know the reasons why somebody would be making it up.
Why one person might do so, we
I
cannot
don't
know.
know.
We cannot know, but if various people, different people from different backgrounds, not necessarily related or connected in any obvious way,
Mhm.
they're all speaking about something, then you would be well advised to take this report seriously, just as if let me compare it to the world of business. If that a person hears that A is considering entering a business partnership with B, but this person knows that B, precisely in such situations of business partnership in the past, has acted dishonestly and swindled his partners out of their fair share of the business or whatever it is, something along those lines. Then and then first of all, that such a thing you are required to report to A and tell him because it's letho'eleth, it's
A good
for a good
purpose.
and positive
Mhm.
end,
Mhm.
and it's based on knowledge that you have. And if you were the person considering such a a business proposition, and you heard this about someone, you would immediately drop it. You would say, well, if
Mhm.
that's this is what people are telling me about him, he's dishonest, he's not to be trusted, then you would immediately drop any notion of entering into any kind of a deal with him. Correct? Because that would be
Yes.
the wise thing to do. And the same is true, even more so, with regards to public affairs, the benefits and the welfare of the Jewish people, and that which benefit or aid the Jewish people, or that which, chas v'shalom, um, damage or harm the Jewish people. The same is true, and even more so. So if we know about a particular politician, for example, that he has acted dishonestly in the past. He has lied to his constituents, to his voters. Uh, and you voted for this person? Would
Mhm.
you vote for him again?
Right.
And
unless he apologized and was, I would not vote for him again.
a reasonable person would not vote for this person again.
Right. Mhm.
And I will give you, I will not mince my words. I will give you a real world example that many of us will recall from recent years in Israeli politics. There is a very evil person by the name of Naftali Bennett, clearly a Rasha. Now, why do I say he's a Rasha? Why do I allow myself to say that? And I'll tell you exactly why. And I'll bring a Gemara that I have in front of me here on the screen in a moment, and I'll quote it to you.
Mhm.
This individual, who years ago took over the what was called the Beit HaYehudi, which was the one of the spin-offs or the fragmentary ricochets of the what was known as the Mafdal once upon a time, the Mizrahi, and it became known as the Beit HaYehudi. This political party, he managed to insinuate himself into this party and became the leader of this party. It's very clear today that he is not a man of principle, far from it. And his only ambition is, and his only desire, and his only aim is self-aggrandizement. There's nothing else that he wishes to achieve. And how do we know this? Well, a number of years ago, I think perhaps 5 years ago, roughly. And as you will recall, there were a number of elections in close proximity, one after the other, for various reasons, which we won't go into right now. Um, he was running at the head of this party, and he promised and swore, and in fact, on television, he actually signed a written letter to the effect that I will not join a coalition with the Israeli left, with Lapid and other such people. He signed this in front of the camera, and then he held it up for the camera to take a shot of. I will not do this. Here it is. I guarantee it. I promise you. It's written here, black and white. This individual and his band of his criminal associates, they garnered 6 seats in the Knesset. Not very much. Certainly, it's never happened in the history of Israeli politics or probably any other country with occasional elections. Whether you call them a democracy or not is another question. It's never happened that such a small party could to claim for itself the right to form a coalition, to form a government. But that's exactly what he did. He immediately turned around, abrogated what he had announced and signed on camera. He turned to Lapid, who's as empty a vessel as one can imagine, and formed a government with him. Now, how did he? And what kind of government did he form? When we say form a government, that's a bit sterile, perhaps. It's not. He's not just forming a government. It's lording over the Jewish people. How did he lord over the Jewish people? He said to Lapid, who had many more seats than him, I don't recall, maybe 18 seats in the Knesset, he said to him, we'll form a government, we'll do what's called a rotation government. In other words, I'll be prime minister for 2 years or something like that, a year and a half, I can't remember. And then you'll be prime minister. We'll share the premiership in uh, complete contradiction and negation of what he had promised or sworn himself to. But they didn't have enough seats to form a government. Just the Israeli left, the Israeli Erev Rav left, which basically means meretz and what the few filaments of the remains of what was once the Labour Party that lorded over this country for decades. So what did they do? And it was obvious this was what they were going to have to do in order to form a government which would achieve a majority in the Knesset. They accepted into their coalition, or they invited into their coalition Arab parties. The major Arab party was headed by a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose name is um, Mansour Abbas. He is a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is, of course, the organization that was established approximately 100 years ago in Egypt by a very, very wily and intelligent and evil Islamo-Nazi by the name of Hassan al-Banna. The aim of this organization, which is a very loose and informal organization, which exists to this day, and precisely because it's informal and loose and ill-defined, it's very difficult to take hold of it and deal with it in any way, if anyone actually wants to deal with it. In the Egyptians, of course, the Egyptian government, the Egyptian military, which wants to rule the country, understands the nature of the threat to their own rule as military dictators of Egypt. So, if you recall, in the wake of the so-called Arab Spring in Egypt, going back now something like 14 years, this individual called Morsi was who was Morsi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Hamas, by the way, is just the Gazan branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, just to keep things in, put things straight and keep them clear and put things in perspective. So this guy Morsi they won an election. They had an election which was sort of free and open, and immediately a majority of Egyptians voted for Morsi, who's the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. Why? Because the majority of the Egyptians are Islamo-Nazis. It's not complicated. It's really simple. So now the Egyptian military doesn't like that because they're used to ruling the country. So what do? They just put him in jail. It's very simple. They threw him in jail, and who has ever since ruled Egypt for the past whatever it is 13 years. Um, the current dictator. What's his name? Assisi. Okay, he's just a general from the Egyptian army, just like Anwar Sadat was. All these are just officers from the Egyptian military who decide that we should rule the country. Okay, that doesn't mean they like us, but it means they don't like the Muslim Brotherhood because the Muslim Brotherhood is competition to their power and their income because the Egyptian military, all the top brass, are constantly skimming huge amounts of money off the defense budget and also all manner of contracts and what have you into their own pockets, and that's their business model. So the Muslim Brotherhood would destroy their entire way of life. So they can't be allowed, obviously. Um, so Egypt is ruled by it's true, Egypt is a Muslim Brotherhood majority country, no question, but it's officially controlled by the, in brackets, Muslim Brotherhood Egyptian military. But they're officially a different organization because they have their own personal agendas and what have you. So Mansour Abbas, so-called Israeli Arab, is such a Islamo-Nazi, and he has a party which garnered I don't recall how many seats, but enough seats to make the difference in terms of forming a majority in the Knesset, a coalition. And so they formed a government, if you recall, some years ago, before this current government was headed, and of course, Naftali Bennett's condition was that I will be first. I'll be the prime minister first, and then only later Lapid. That's why it worked out. That's why it worked out that Bennett was prime minister for about a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken, and Lapid, the useful idiot, only managed to be prime minister for about 4 months before the election, which took place at the beginning of Kislev Taushin Pegimo. In other words, November, it was, I think, the 7th of November 2022. That was the last election, correct? When Netanyahu once again came to power. But for the period before that, for a somewhat brief period before that, we had this coalition government established by Bennett and Lapid with Arab participation. They made all kinds of outrageous promises and um, funding and what have you for Arabs and Arab causes in order to bribe him into their coalition, which is what they did. And of course, it was that very same government, the Bennett Lapid government, that decided simply because the Hezbollah decided to send a drone, an unarmed drone, to fly by an Israeli gas rig in the Mediterranean Sea.
Mhm.
He saw that as a threat, which of course it was, and he immediately decided to hand over um, to cede control and sovereignty of Israeli territorial waters, a certain area in the Mediterranean Sea that had been disputed between Lebanon and Israel for years, and had been the negotiations had been going on for 10 years and hadn't been going nowhere, which is fine. Negotiations that go nowhere and don't cause us harm
Mhm.
is okay. But he immediately decided that's it. We're handing it over, and they convinced and it wasn't voted on the Knesset, and they convinced the Bagatz, the High Court here, so called, that this was essential. It has to happen, and this happened exactly, precisely, um, just over a year before the current war began, and was in the wake of that decision that I said, and it's recorded, it's on YouTube, you can see it, that there's no question that war is imminent, because that was such a display and demonstration of weakness and cowardice that cannot but convince our enemies that it's time to attack. And that's exactly what happened. So I said that on Sukkoth, exactly 1 year before the war began. And the war began on the last day of Sukkoth, Shmini Aseret, Simchat Torah, exactly 1 year later. All right, so why did I mention all of this?
Mhm. We're talking about
Because
politicians
we're
and
talking about let us now return
Naftali
to
Bennett.
the
Hmm.
main evildoer here for our
Hmm.
purposes,
Hmm.
Naftali Bennett, who is a Jew.
Hmm.
He wears a kippah, a minuscule kippah, that has to be
Hmm.
said, but as a kippah of some sort on his head, usually in such a position that the camera cannot pick it up. And that's obviously by design. But okay, that's who he
Hmm.
is. He claims to be religious. I don't believe him, but that's not the point for now. The point is that he's a liar. And if it wasn't, it was clear to me and to many other people way years ago. But many people refused to believe this. I had more than one conversation with various Jews who, for whatever reason, decided we don't like Netanyahu, and Naftali Bennett is a good alternative. He'll be better. Okay, so we got Naftali Bennett, and we all know what happened, as we just discussed. So we got ourselves a government in which the Muslim Brotherhood was a partner, which handed over sovereign Israeli territory in the sea to our enemies, and brought upon us this current war and everything else that we see. This also spelt a golden period for the Erev Rav in this country, who their legal so-called quasi-legal dictatorship over the Jewish people by way of the courts and the Attorney General's office and all the rest of it. So why am I mentioning all this in this context? Because it says here, and I'm going to share the screen with you now. This is to be found in Masechet Yoma, in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Yoma, Daf Pei Waw Amud Bet, 86b, or
Hmm.
5 lines from the bottom. It's marked out
Yes.
in that purple
Hmm.
color. Mefarsamim et hanefim mipnei hilul Hashem. It is correct and necessary to publicize and make known to people that a certain person who presents himself as forthright and honest and kosher is in fact a an evildoer and a person with evil intentions and is a charlatan. And that's what it says again. Have a look again. It says over here, "Mefarsamim et hanefim mipnei hilul Hashem." And Rashi says, "Mefarsamim et hanefim." A hanef is a person who is basically a a hypocrite who says one thing and means something else, says one thing
Mine,
and does something else. Rashi
right.
says shehem rashaim, people who are evil,
Wow.
umarim atzmam kasadikim, and they show them, but they present themselves to the public as
Hmm.
good people. Im
Hmm.
yesh makir b'ma'aso, if there is someone, a good Jew, who knows that this is the kind of person he is, and he sees that other Jews are being taken in by this person, mitzvah lefarsamo. It is a mitzvah to make this known to people. Mipaneh hilul Hashem. Shebnei adam lemedim mima'asav, because people, if they think he's okay, is kosher, they will learn from his actions. Shesvurim alo shehu tzaddik. They will think he's okay, he's righteous, he's a good, he means to do the right thing, and people will take him at his word or learn from his actions. Well, and more, furthermore, kesheba alo puranuth, and furthermore, if and when he is seen to be punished by Hashem. In other words, something, but some his downfall comes about. B'nei adam omrim ma ho'ilo zechutho. If people think he's righteous and yet something terrible befalls him, or he has a political or financial or personal calamity, then people will think, look, a righteous person, this is what happens to him. In other words, it's a Hilul Hashem. People say it makes no difference if you're righteous or not righteous. Terrible things
Hmm.
will happen to you either way,
Hmm.
and therefore it's necessary that people know it's very likely that this happened because he's an evildoer and he's being punished. At any rate,
Wow,
you see,
it's yeah, it's interesting how Rashi says im yesh makir. It doesn't say im yesh edim, im yesh evidence, im
right,
yesh. It's just
right,
it
Machon,
sounds like its
correct.
own. That's very interesting.
All right, so how much more so is this the case, and is this valid and correct
Hmm.
and legitimate to think and act in this way
Hmm.
when we're talking about the welfare and the existence and the future of the Jewish people as a whole? It's not just that people in your community know that this person is not on the up and up, or that people don't go into business with him, as we mentioned before, etc. No, we're talking about someone who is a true danger to the Jewish people, to Klal Yisrael. How can there be a thought to tell people about such a thing? How can it be? It cannot be. It's insane
Hmm.
to think such a thing.
Right, and it seems that Rashi is measuring it by the Chilul Hashem. If there's a greater Chilul Hashem, there's a greater obligation to stop it and to tell the MS. And that's what it
Yes.
seems. That's
What
what
I'm
it,
what I'm what I'm
wow.
adding is that
Hmm.
in this statement in the Talmud, in Masechet Yoma and in Rashi, the assumption is not that we are speaking of someone who has it in his power to cause great tragedy and calamity and evil and harm to the Jewish people as a whole. It may be that he's just in your community. People need to know what kind of person he truly is, and people need to be warned and aware of this fact. But
Hmm.
I'm saying how much more? Kal Homer, if it's
Yeah.
the case that he is someone who wishes to lord over the Jewish
Right.
people and
Hmm.
form a government with a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood, having sworn that he won't do this, of course, swearing all along that he's only trying to do the best for the Jewish people and the state of Israel
Hmm.
and what have you,
Hmm.
when of course all he wants to do is be prime minister. Clear. That's
Hmm.
obvious. That's clear. And
Hmm.
of course now he wants to run again. When the next election comes about, which will be within the next 6 months, apparently,
Hmm.
or so,
Wow.
he will be running, this individual.
Hmm.
It's amazing that there are still people who would vote for him. I don't think he'll do very well, but he will. There will be people who will vote for him. From what I understand, all his all his support actually comes not from the right. You see, in the past, he was trying to garner votes from the right, from the religious and the right, as an alternative to Netanyahu, so to speak, or
Hmm.
an alternative to the Zionist religious crowd,
Like
something like that.
Olmert,
Hmm.
like another Russia.
Something like that. Yeah, another something similar to that. Yeah. Although, Olmert is, of course, uh, uh, so deeply embedded in the radical left and the Erev that it's difficult to put into words. But yes, that was how he presented himself at the time, because Olmert came from a revisionist family, from a Jabotinskyite family. So that's how he presented himself. But of course, we know he was anything but. So Baruch Hashem, it seems that most people on the right and most religious people, or what we call dati light type people, will have woken up by this time to who Bennett really is. But there are people on the left maybe the soft left or something you want to call them, who still see him as an option, and he will go on, which is maybe good because as Netanyahu likes to answer certain kinds of questions about such matters, he says the manner in which the Israeli left and the opposition divides their votes amongst themselves is not my business. So okay, so let the people want to vote for him go ahead. At any rate, it's clear, you see, that it's necessary to disillusion people when they are misapprehending the reality, when they do not understand what's being done to them or what other people are trying to do or planning. It's absolutely necessary and essential to make this known, and it's not at all connected to any halakha of Lashon HaRa.
So is this the source? I mean, I'm sure it's not the only source of Lashon Hara. I mean, there must be.
No,
Why
it's
is
not the
this
only source.
not right? But why is this not? I've never heard this before. It's fascinating. What does this include? Does this also include talking? Oh, I disagree with Rabbi so and so, Rabbi Billy, and he said this and that. And how do we
All right. Well, again, I will
discussing? Yeah.
look.
Because this is something, this is where there's he's clearly doing something that's terrible with the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, you don't have to be a huge a sage, in order to realize it's not a good idea. So what about when it's a little bit more subtle? I think that's the
look. Clearly, I'm not about to say. No one would say that it's mutar, that it's permissible to speak lashon hara or to disparage someone, and particularly not a Tamid Chachamim, a Torah scholar, simply because they disagree with you. No, but having said that, we have to now expound on this matter. We have to explicate the matter.
Yes.
In other words, I'll give an example, and it's always a good thing to mention a halakha ma'aseh as part of our conversation, so that there's some clear Torah content and value and added value to our conversation that some people may benefit from. So let's take the following example. It sounds like a very banal thing, and it is in some ways, but drinking a cup of tea on Shabbat, is it mutar to make a cup of tea on Shabbat? And if so, how? This is not a political issue, correct? Nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Islamo-Nazis. All right, it's a purely, internal Jewish discussion. What is mutar on Shabbat? All right, so we know that it is asur to cook on Shabbat. What happens when you put tea leaves in very hot water? They cook. That's called cooking. You produce tea, correct? True. In order to define the concept of bishul, of cooking, we have to say as follows, and you have to prove that this is what you're doing. Well, it's quite simple to prove. Let us say I take some tea leaves or a tea bag, and I pour cold water from the tap on them. Will I get a cup of tea? No. If I leave tea leaves in water at room temperature for 24 hours, perhaps a bit less, then I will get tea. That's not by cooking, that's by infusion. Okay? This is a halachic, it's also a reality, it's a simple, straightforward reality, and it's also something known as in halakha. You have bishul, which is cooking, and you have something which is soaked in something else for an extended period of time, and then it takes on the flavor of that item. So if you leave tea leaves in cold water for an extended period of time, eventually you will get tea. Maybe not as good, but you'll get tea. Something along. If you want it to be hot tea, then you'll have to heat it up. But the water will be infused with the flavor and the color of the tea leaves. The same is true of coffee. Some people prefer, if you're a coffee aficionado, then you'll know that some people prefer cold brew coffee. How do you do that? You take, first you take coffee beans and you roast them because that improves the flavor, but that's not cooking. And you grind them up, so you now have this coffee powder, but it's not cooked. And if you put it into cold water and you leave it for 12 hours or 24 hours, you have an infusion, a coffee infusion. It tastes a little bit different from cooked coffee in hot water. Some people prefer it. They say it's better for whatever reason. Okay, fine. But if you wish to cook, but that takes time because there's no heat involved. If you want to cook a coffee, then you have to pour boiling water or either use an espresso machine or whatever, pour boiling water over the coffee grinds to get a cup of coffee, correct? Fine, because that's called cooking. That's bishul, and that's asur on Shabbat, and that's why I hold that is asur to make tea. That is to say, uncooked tea or uncooked coffee, such as Turkish coffee or espresso coffee on Shabbat. There's no way to make that permissible on Shabbat. Some people say you can make a cup of tea in a kli shalishi, what's a third vessel. In other words, you take the water from the urn, put it into a cup. That's a kli sheni, a second vessel. Pour that into another cup. That's a kli shalishi, a third vessel. Into that you can put your tea bag, and that somehow magically becomes mutar. I say that's total nonsense. And it's very simple to prove that it's nonsense because the fact is you get tea from that. Maybe it's not quite as good as tea with completely boiling water, the water that was truly boiling or near boiling, but you get a cup of tea because the water was hot. Some people claim that in a kli shalishi, it's yad soledet bo, that the water is not hot enough for you to retract your finger from it if you put your finger in the water. Well, with regards to that, I can tell you the following story. Once I was in a certain home. It happened to be on a trip. I was in Australia, and I was staying in someone's home, and it was Leil Shabbat. It was Friday night, and I wanted some tea, but it turned out they had not prepared tea before Shabbat. So I said, no problem. I'll just drink hot water, which is what I did. But there was another guest at this person's home who said, "What's the problem? You can make it in a kli shalishi." And I said, well, I don't believe so. He says, well, I just have a book. I happen to have bought a book here by a certain rabbi. I won't mention the name, who says that it's mutar and a kli shalishi. And I said, okay. And what does it say there? He said, oh, actually, I have it here in my bag. And I said, all right. So show me. He pulled out the sefer. We looked at it together, and it said, kli shalishi, amayim, en ayad soledet mehem. The water is not hot enough that if you put your finger in it, you'll have to withdraw your finger immediately because it's too hot. I said, all right, let's see. So I went over to the cupboard. This was a home I'd stayed in many times, so I felt pretty much at home. I went over to the cupboard, I took out a glass mug. I put water in it from the urn, which is now kli sheni. I poured into another cup, which is a kli shalishi. And I told the person, put your finger in it, and he did. And he immediately, ouch, and he removed his finger. And I said, well, I think I've proved my point, the end of discussion. And it was the end of the discussion. If you put tea in hot water, even if it's not 100 degrees or 90 degrees or 80 degrees, but it's 60 degrees, you'll still get coffee. You'll still get some kind of reasonable form of tea from it. If you put it in cold water, you won't. That's a fact. Why am I mentioning all of this? First of all, as I said, it's good to discuss some halacha ma'aseh as well. If a rabbi comes along and says, no, I think you can make tea in a kli shalishi, I think he's completely wrong. I just explained why. I think he's misleading people, and I will say so. And I think it's very serious because it's a asur min haTorah to cook anything on Shabbat. It's a sil Torah mamash to make tea in a kli shalishi on Shabbat, or coffee in the same way. I'm not talking about instant coffee because instant coffee was cooked and then dried. So en bishul ahar bishul. You cannot cook something twice, and therefore instant coffee you can make gesundheit as much as you like in any way you like. I think you can pour water directly from the urn on instant coffee. You don't have to use a kli sheni as some people suggest or whatever, but not Turkish coffee, not espresso coffee, nor anything like that, because that was cooked and these were not cooked. And so what do I do before Shabbat, for example? I want coffee on Shabbat, tea. I make it before Shabbat, obviously. I take some kind of a jug or container, and I put a lot of Turkish coffee in it, and I mix it with some boiling water, and I mix it up. So I have this coffee concentrate, from which I can now make coffee on Shabbat. And the same is true with tea. This is also what the Mishnah Berurah says exactly about how to make tea on Shabbat. The Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim was not aware of this newfangled heter of a kli shalishi. He never heard of such a thing. even though tea was the thing that people drank in Russia, where the Hafetz Chaim was. It was cold, and people liked their tea, and he knew all about drinking tea. But he writes in the Mishnah Berurah, this is how you have to make tea before Shabbat, otherwise you can't have tea on Shabbat. So I'm not going to disparage a Rav who says it's mutar to make tea in that way on Shabbat. I'm not going to relate Lashon HaRa about him, but I will tell people this psak halacha is completely wrong. It's fallacious. It's not based on any true halachic source. In other words, you won't find this concept in the Talmud. You won't find it in the Rishonim. In fact, you find something the opposite of that in a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Shabbat. Won't go into that now. And I'll tell people you should not rely on it under any circumstances. It's completely wrong. That I will say. But I will not disparage that person. I will not say Lashon HaRa about such a person. Why? Because it's asur. Why should I? Why is that? Why would it be mutar to do so?
Absolutely.
It would not be a mutar.
It's a potential d'oraisa, so we have to be obviously extra careful. So, but the question then comes back: the Rabbanim who believe in this, there was tea when they were around. Did they not? I mean, there was obviously hot tea. There was kli shlishi and above. Did they not realize this? I mean, the question has to be asked. I mean, it sounds so simple.
But
so
I just answered. But I told you the Mishnah Berurah, the Hafetz Chaim, knew all about tea. He drank tea every day, apparently. All the Jews and all the Russian non-Jews in that part of the world drank tea regularly. That's part of the culture, part of the reality. And yet he says very clearly, if you wish to drink tea on Shabbat, this is what you must do. And he describes how you prepare the tea before Shabbat. He actually is more machmir than I was just now, but I won't go into the details now. But the fact is, he does not think for a moment that you can produce tea in any fashion on Shabbat. You have to do something before Shabbat. Okay.
So how is it possible that later Rabbanim
I don't know. I don't know, but I don't have to answer that question. I just proved to you the point, because the Rabbanim who tell me a kli shlishi is mutar, and then they go on to tell me it's because the mayim is lo en ayad soredet mehem. It's because it's not the water is not that hot in a kli shlishi, and then I prove to you by taking water from an urn, putting it into one cup, then immediately pouring into another cup, and then telling you to put your finger in it and let's see what happens. And the person says ouch and immediately removes their finger. What does that tell you? That this is nonsense. It's just not true. You can see that it's not true. So let's just put it aside and let's not discuss it any further. Does it bother me to some extent, to a minor extent, that certain well-known Rabbanim have said this in the past, and I won't mention the name, but a certain very well famous posek whom I hold in very great regard also said such a thing? Yes, it bothers me. But what am I going to do? That's the reality. On the other hand, just as it bothers me that this or that Rav told the Jewish people that it was okay to give away parts of Eretz Yisrael to the Islamo Nazis because this would bring peace and save lives. Does that bother me? Of course it bothers me. Do I think that they're off their rockers? Yes, I do. And is it necessary to say so? Yes, it is. But doesn't mean I'm not going to say Lashon HaRa, but I'm going to speak the truth. And these people have Jewish blood on their hands. These rabbis have much Jewish blood on their hands, no question. And if a certain well-known, very famous, world-famous Rav prevented people in the Haredi world from opposing Ariel Sharon's criminal plan to hand over Rituat Azah, the Gaza Strip, to the Islamo Nazis and drive out all the Jews from there, as happened 20 years ago. And I know that a certain famous Rav was told people who were in the Haredi world who were opposed to this plan and said it was dangerous and what have you. And he said, don't say anything, be quiet. Does that Rav have much Jewish blood on his hands? Well, I think we all know the answer. Do I sleep comfortably at night with that fact? Not really. But what can I do? What can I say? What can I do? That's the reality. Those are the facts. This person was wrong. What did he think? Why did he think so? I never spoke to him. I cannot tell you. But I know that's at least that's what I heard. I didn't hear it directly from him, so I'm not going to mention his name. I'm not going to say who it was, and I cannot claim that I know it to be 100% factual. But having heard it from certain sources, it seems to me this is what happened. It is a fact. This much is a fact that the entire Haredi world simply stood on the sidelines and watched it happen and said nothing. That's a fact, correct? That's an historical fact. Well, that same Haredi world claims, correctly to some extent, to a large extent, that they always follow the lead of their Gedolei Torah, of their rabbis, or some rabbis, certain rabbis that they appoint, they designate as Gedolei Torah. So if they said nothing and did nothing, all these the representatives, the political representatives of the Haredi world in the Knesset in Israeli public life said nothing and went along with this plan, by the way, parenthetically, because they were promised, if I recall the figure correctly, 640 million shekel for yeshivot, which they never received, by the way, but that's another discussion.
This is a very this is not parenthetically. This is not in brackets. This has to be. I mean,
well, so what does this tell us?
No,
So what does this tell us? This tells us that world of Torah, while on the one hand having within its ranks many great Talmidei Chachamim who are very pious and well-intentioned, but on many issues it is impossible not to reach the conclusion, the obvious, inescapable conclusion, that they are completely and utterly misguided and wrong.
right.
How much clearer could it be?
Right.
And I'll mention something else, which is similar in nature in some ways. This was something we discussed last night at the shiur that I gave in Yerushalayim. It's well known in the Haredi world, Haredi Rabbanim are vehemently opposed to Jews going onto HaRa, the Temple Mount. Correct?
Right. Yes.
Now, and their reasoning, I won't go into their reasoning for this right now, but that's their position. But it's not only a question in their mind of Jews entering a space, an area which is forbidden from which Jews are forbidden entrance for an halachic reason. It's not just that. They're wrong about that, I believe, but that's another discussion. They also will tell you, some of them will tell you openly, and I heard Rav Moshe Sternbuch, the head of the Badatz, say this in a recorded interview that I saw. I saw this over the past year, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. You can view it easily enough, in which he says clearly, in this case it was in English, but he says the same thing in Hebrew as well, because he speaks English. He was brought up in England. He says that it causes danger to the Jewish people because it incites the Arabs to kill us. In other words, if we didn't go onto HaRa, they wouldn't kill us. This is the implication, which is, we all know that to be entirely true. Obviously, that's real. That's the real world, right? That's how the world works. If Itamar Ben Gvir did not go onto HaRa, then there wouldn't be a war with the Islamo Nazis. Correct? There would be no problem. Of course, they will use that as an excuse. Of course, they will mention that, and it does anger them. But the very fact that we are in Eretz Yisrael and breathing angers them as well.
That's right. Yeah.
But so what does this particular Rav Sternbuch, or for that matter, Rav Dov Landau from Bnei Brak, currently considered to be the leader of the Haredi or the Litai Haredi world? What do they say? They say very clearly, we want all the Arabs to know that we, the Haredim, are completely opposed to Jews like Itamar Ben Gvir going on to HaRa. Why do they want them to know that? Because they're saying, if you must kill Jews because you're being incited, don't kill us because we're opposed. Kill someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the message. What are you supposed to do with
There's no other way to interpret that. But
no, there is
it's
no
not
other way.
us. It's them.
Exactly.
Leave us alone.
Again, I'm not making this up. You can go onto YouTube and check it out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And they want you to know this. It's not that I discovered something of which they are embarrassed, which they were trying to keep under wraps. No, they are telling people, speaking into the microphone and making it clear and known to all. We oppose this. It has nothing to do with us. So leave us alone.
Mm-hmm. That's
these
cowardice. That's pure cowardice at its pure definition.
And yes, true. And it's also a form of willful insanity or willful blindness.
That's insanity. Okay.
And certain people want me to imagine that these are the true leaders of the Jewish people of the generation. This kind of this kind of approach and ideology and perspective on reality is what the Jewish people need to hear. I don't know. I mean, you tell me. Maybe I'm getting
I'm
this all
nobody.
wrong. Tell me where I'm going wrong. Tell me which of the facts or the observations that I have
Well,
mentioned here, which of those things was wrong?
the one that just makes me absolutely disgusted is the money that they received, over 600 something million. What was it? Million? How much was
That was the figure that was
Yeah,
bandied about 20
yeah,
years ago when
yeah. But
Sharon had
that's
to bribe them
right.
to go
Bribe.
along with his plan.
Right. And they said
From what I
nothing.
know, they only got about 150 million in the end of that
It wasn't worth
640 million that was
it.
promised. But that's also par for the course. I mean, everyone's
Right.
lying to
But
everyone
this
all the time.
means but once someone can be bought, once there's a price tag, then who knows what else is next?
You're
I
right.
mean, that shows where the oh, Jay, this is so
You're right.
depressing.
It is. It
It's
is.
very.
Indeed, it is.
Mhm. I just I want to ask, since you mentioned about Hilchos Shabbos, electricity on Shabbos. I mean,
Okay.
it's a very long topic, I have no doubt, and there's probably not even
Obviously we're not
enough
going to cover
time.
this. We're not going to cover
Right,
this right now. But go on.
right, of
What's the question
course. But
specifically?
I just okay. This so specifically phones on Shabbos,
Okay.
cell phones on Shabbos.
Right.
I ask for two reasons. The main reason is the boys that I see, they think they're such Rishon because they use their phone on Shabbos. And in my mind, I tell them it's much better to use your phone than smoke on Shabbos. To me,
No
it's
question.
you don't
No
there's no
question.
question. And but they think they make it seem as if they just had like a cheeseburger or they just ate chazer. Like the 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 belief that I am such a I'm such a machal Shabbos is so
Right.
pervasive based on
I hear you.
phones.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Well, we know what the Mishnah states in Masechet Avot. The Mishnah states, "Al tia rasha b'fnei asmach." Do not be an
Mhm.
evildoer in your own eyes.
Right. I mean, well,
Now, and if you
that's
really are an evildoer, if you're
mhm,
a Naftali Bennett, for example, then you better be evil in your own
mhm.
eyes because that's who you are. You better look in
I
the mirror
agree.
and wake up every morning and
Mhm,
say to yourself,
mhm,
"I am evil." Okay,
mhm,
that's one thing.
mhm,
But a Jew who thinks that he's doing something wrong when in fact he's not doing something wrong at all,
mhm,
or he's doing
mhm,
something wrong, but it's not nearly as serious as he may
mhm.
imagine, that's something different. That's something, and such a
Absolutely.
person needs to be
Absolutely.
informed of this fact.
Right. And then this is the issue that these days, especially the young adults, the young men, they everything is across the board. They don't. There's no distinction. It's either usher or it's mutter, and there's no levels within prohibition,
Correct. You're right.
and that's a problem.
This is a problem. You're absolutely right.
Mhm,
Yeah, you're absolutely correct about this.
mhm,
But that's not how the Torah works. In the Torah, you have various levels of prohibition, which is nothing new. Everyone knows this.
mhm, mhm,
Um, the Rambam writes in his Perush on the Mishnah that the severity, the seriousness of a certain prohibition in the Torah um, can be judged by the punishment that the Torah designates for that particular sin.
mhm,
For example, um, smoking on Shabbat, Chas Shalom. In other words, lighting a fire on Shabbat
mhm. Cooking something.
or cooking on Shabbat. These are
Mhm,
clearly things which are asur min haTorah, prohibited by Torah law, and they're very serious because Hilul Shabbat is extremely one of the most serious things in the Torah. On the other hand, eating a ham sandwich, which every Jew knows who has any knowledge or experience of Judaism knows is something that is completely abhorrent to Jews. But the truth is, it's not a very serious isur. It's asur, it's prohibited, absolutely, but it's not at all to be compared to Hilul Shabbat. It cannot be compared to desecrating Shabbat. It's much less serious. It's not mutar by any means. It's asur, absolutely. And if in normal times, a Jew who was known to have done such a thing and had been warned ahead of time by two Jews, witnesses, who said, that's a ham sandwich and it's asur, you must not eat it. And he says, I know and I don't care and I'm going to eat it. And he does. The Beit Din would give him a whipping, but he wouldn't be put to death. But for Hilul Shabbat, b'mizid, you would be put to death. It would be mitaf Beit Din. You can't compare these things, obviously. Now, with regards to on a totally different,
and the other part of the phones, I know that texting is not considered chsiva. It's not considered writing. If I'm right, how do I know? Because I dafka asked on Chol Hamoed when we don't write. I remember asking a Rav, one allowed to
all right,
text,
you can't really compare the two
right.
those two
Okay, that could
parts
be.
of those two
Yeah.
fields of halakha, Chol Hamoed and Shabbat.
Yes.
But you are correct. At least this is my view. It I think it is. There may be those who disagree, but I think it is clear there is no Isur Torah involved in using a phone on Shabbat, whether it's texting or speaking or what have you. Not no Isur min Torah, and it's actually very dubious whether there's any Isur midivrei soferim either.
Wow.
But that doesn't mean it's mutar, because
Right.
I think it's clearly asur mishum uvadin dehol. In other words, ma'asim shel hol. In other words, one of the central and extremely important aspects of Shabbat is that Shabbat be maintained and appreciated and experienced as a very different day, period of time, one time slot in the week, which is very different from all other time slots in the week. In other words, this day is different from all other days. This day has to be different from all other days in every way. So even if there's no clear isur, no clear Torah prohibition, not minat Torah, not even perhaps midivrei soferim, and I admit that there are different opinions about some of these things, these finer points to do with electricity and or electronic devices or what have you. But putting that aside, it's clear that Shabbat has to be a different day, a different time, and therefore it is asur, and this isur is midivrei soferim, clearly is of rabbinic origin, ovadin dahol. In other words, doing things which are asur, not doing things which are weekday activities. The kinds of things that we do all week, we don't do on Shabbat. And nowadays, what is it that most people do all week? They use their phones or their computers or what have you. Now, I understand that some people, for various reasons, and you have experience of this in your practice as a psychologist, you deal with young men, perhaps from, at least I think often from Haredi backgrounds, and they're experiencing various difficulties and crises in their lives for whatever reason. And we could discuss this, and in fact, I would like to discuss, perhaps not today, perhaps next time. You could tell us more about some of the cases that you come into contact with. What exactly is causing these people to go off the derech or to be experiencing various crises and pain in their lives? Okay, that's an important discussion in and of itself that we perhaps all need to know more about. But it's important that these young men know, and of course it could be young women as well, that this is not the most serious or obvious Hilul Shabbat, and they should not consider themselves to be people who are being Mahalel Shabbat in the most obvious and Torah-based fashion. They're not. And therefore they should not think that, well, if I'm really doing this, then I can do anything else because I'm already a goner. It's too late for
That's
me.
exactly
I'm going straight to hell. I'm going to Gehenom, and there's no hope for me. And even if that were true, that you're doing something which is asur min haTorah on Shabbat, lo alenu, then there's always you can do teshuvah. But certainly you shouldn't be under the impression that you are an evildoer for whom there is no hope, and it's not true that what you're doing is perhaps nearly as asur as you think it is. Not that I'm condoning it in any way.
Right. I understand. Sure. But I condone it when there's a choice of smoking, or then I tell them definitely use your phones, use your phone.
No
And
question.
that's
That
right.
there's no, and I don't think there's any
Mhm.
Rav who would dispute that.
Right, right. I understand.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
think so.
yeah.
I don't think so.
And these are b'di'evids, obviously. These are not, none of this is
Obviously,
l'chassid.
look, a person. This is a general rule of thumb that we need to perhaps mention here, and perhaps with this will end today.
Mhm.
That a person who is mentally unstable, there are obviously different levels. There's a
Mhm.
whole spectrum of mental health or ill health. But a person who is mentally unwell, suffering trauma of or suffering trauma of different kinds, or terribly depressed. Okay, that's a mental health problem.
Mhm.
Depression is a mental health
Yes.
problem.
Mhm.
There are different levels of depression, I
Mhm.
understand, and there are people who suffer um, not necessarily depression, but different types of schizophrenia or personality issues, and they're not dysfunctional people for various reasons, or at least on occasion they find themselves in that state of mind or state of nefesh, of soul.
Mhm.
Such a person, we obviously have to be much more mekil with regards to such a
Mhm.
person and much more accommodating, and we have to try and help such a person. I remember a
Mhm.
certain
Mhm.
person who, from a young age, was diagnosed with certain mental issues and found, has always found, um, living his life according to halacha in various respects, particularly things like davening and barachot and what have you, praying the right time or praying at all or what have you. He found he had difficulty with various things, but he's someone who is officially and unequivocally recognized and diagnosed with mental health issues. So
Mhm.
he asked me, "What am I required to do according to halacha? A person in my situation, what am I? When I get up in the morning, what do I need to say? What do I need to daven? Because I can't do what everyone's doing." So I told him what he can do and what he should do. And if you're in this state of mind, you can do this. And if you're in that state of mind, you can do less, and etc. And if you're in a state of mind right now where you are incapable of doing anything, don't do anything. If you can say Birkot HaShachar, say Birkot HaShachar. That's all you can do now. That's what you say. And if you can say Birkot HaShachar plus Kriyat Shema, say that. And if
Mhm.
you can say Kriyat
Mhm.
Shema with Birkot Kriyat Shema, that's what you should do. And if you can do more, you'll do more. But you should know that the halacha has a response and has a remedy or a prescription for someone in your situation. It's not true that, well, I'm not doing what everyone else is required to do, so I'm just a rasha, I'm just an evildoer, and I'm going to burn in hell, and there's no hope for me. No, it's not true. You're suffering from a serious disease, and halachically, at least sometimes, this person has the definition of a shoteh, of someone who is
Mhm.
not responsible for their actions.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
same may be true of some of the young men with whom you are dealing.
I don't know that I would call them shota, but I understand. I understand. It's that there are
Look,
they have that is
there's
recognized.
obvious,
Their mental health is recognized as
yeah,
legitimate by the Torah. That Hashem is not ignoring or discounting them.
and they have to be encouraged,
Mhm.
and they have to be told that they are Jews, and they have they are, as a Jew, they have responsibility, and they also have they are viewed very favorably by Hashem, because Hashem chose the Jewish people, and you are a member of
Mhm.
the Jewish people, and you have a role to play in this world, and Hashem loves you and wishes you to
That's
do the
beautiful.
right thing and to help and wishes you to succeed. And if you're
Mhm.
experiencing various difficulties and crises, um, Hashem is aware, and, uh, and Hashem is forgiving, and you should not give up on yourself.
That's a
Those are
beautiful.
the
That's
most
beautiful.
the most fundamental
Mhm.
things that a
Mhm.
person in that situation needs to
Mhm.
hear.
That's
But of
exactly what
course,
it
it's
is.
also true that some people just have HaRa, evil inclination,
Mhm.
and there are all kinds of
Right.
other influences and circumstances that may cause a person to to act
Mhm.
completely in a completely unacceptable manner. And they have to be told that as well. So, and there you have to be the judge of such a thing, because you perhaps are aware of their true situation.
This is a beautiful place to stop. They need to
Yep.
hear it, but that Ribono Shalom loves them.
Yeah.
That's what's really.
And
Thank you, Rav.
and they need to love themselves as well. A person
Right.
has to, just as the Torah says, "V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha," love thy neighbor as thyself.
Right.
You also
I
you have
mean,
to, therefore you have to
love
love yourself.
thyself.
You have to have a positive attitude towards yourself, and
Right.
to know that
Wow.
you're capable of doing the right thing, and you're capable of doing great things.
Right.
And to be just a simple, standard, good Jew on a day-to-day basis, that itself is a great thing.
Absolutely. Wow. Just to be a mensch. Just to be a mensch. That's
right.
Wow. Thank you, Rav, so much.
All right, my friends, be well.
Thank you, Rav. Thank
Shashem
you.
yivarech etchem, nishma b'sorot
Amen.
tovot, yeshuot, nekamot, v'nehamot.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks.
Hayu beruchim. Shalom v'nisachot.
Amen.